just finished reading Profit's Brand Relevance Index study. They surveyed about 13,000 consumers wanting to understand which brands they could not live without. And as you'd expect, companies like Apple, Nike, Bose, Disney, and Netflix were all companies that were on this list. And the reason why is pretty simple. They all have amazing products and services. They drive value and utility. They have an emotional connection with its customers. I remember as a young kid, I used to ask my mom for Nikes. In fact, I would beg her to buy me a pair of Nikes so I could run a little bit faster when I tried out for the basketball team, or jump a little bit higher when I was going up for the layup. And that is exactly the way Nike wanted me to feel. That is the emotional connection. That is how Nike was relevant to me growing up. It's part of my history. It's part of my childhood. But what about those brands that aren't Nike or Spotify or Netflix or Bose? What about those brands that didn't make the top 50 or the top 100 or the top 1,000? Maybe they'll never make a list like this. How do they become relevant to a brand? How do they become someone's legacy? How do they drive a connection with its consumers? And how do they become relevant in consumers' everyday lives? Well, that's what we're here to talk about today. How do you become relevant to an audience? And I want to talk about it and contextualize it through the lens of economics, specifically supply and demand. Now, supply and demand is the relationship between the price that a company wants to sell their products for and the price that consumers are willing to pay for it. There's a balance between supply and demand over the course of that process to determine what the market value becomes. And basically, the more of something there is in the market, the less valuable it becomes. The more people want something, the more valuable it is. Now, there's an argument among economists as to which comes first, supply or demand. And within the context of brand relevance, I believe demand starts first. Let me show you why. So this model starts with demand. Specifically, what are the stories, the topics, what are the trends that are demanding the attention of your audience? Now, we're looking at 3 different audiences here. And if you work in marketing, your audience might be different than if you work in PR. For example, traditional media, we're talking about journalists. And if you do work in PR, then you want to understand what are the stories and topics that the media is writing about and at what frequency. Maybe your audience are influencers. And we've talked a lot about influencers over the last 6-7 episodes. And these influencers can be media or non-media influencers. They are the ones who are driving the conversation and building markets and categories. What are they talking about? What is trending among this group? And the last audience, well, is audiences. Now, it could be IT decision makers. It could be a group of CIOs or even developers. Or in some cases, it's moms, 18 to 35 who live in Chicago or Los Angeles. Regardless of who your audience is, you want to understand their psychology. What do they care about? What are they talking about? What channels do they use? What are their brand affinities? Now, in order to understand these audiences, you need analytics. You need to understand what is traditional media writing about. What do they care about? What are the topics that are dominating their headlines? If it's influencers, what are the topics and trends that they care about? And so analytics can tell us these things. It can tell us who the top influencers are. It can tell us what the media is writing about. And it can tell us what are the affinities of certain audiences. But that's only half the equation, because now you need to do a self-assessment of your brand, of your stories, of your communications that you put out there to make sure, does it even map to what my audiences care about? And you can do this a variety of different ways. You can look at your earned media and see when the media does cover my brand or my executives, are these the stories that I want everybody else to know? Do they align with my messaging? Do they align with what I want to be known for from a brand perspective? It's also looking at your owned content, your long form content that you're publishing in the marketplace through executives on LinkedIn, or perhaps it's a newsroom or blog or a byline or sponsored article that you pitch to a media publication. And lastly, it's the social content. What are the stories? What's the creative look like? Is it aligned with what our audiences care about? Because the problem with most brands today is they publish messaging that doesn't resonate with their audiences. They create personas in a vacuum without any real data to say, okay, our audience is this, and this is what they care about, with zero data to back it up. So this model of supply and demand helps us look pretty deep into what our audiences care about, and it gives us the intelligence to then create content or pitch stories or buy media that is in alignment with what our audience cares about. And that's the first step at becoming relevant to your audience and really building brand relevance in the marketplace. It's really not that complicated of a model. It's ensuring that your supply of content or your supply of stories meets the demand of your audience. Now, the challenge in some cases is that you might have multiple audiences, in which case you have to prioritize. If you're in PR, your audience might be different than those who work in marketing. In either case, you still have to drill down and understand what those audiences care about. What are they talking about? What are those affinities? So that you can then build programs into the content and the programs and the marketing that you're publishing so that it matches up with what your customers care about. That, my friends, is brand relevance. Thank you for tuning in this week. Thank you for spending 6 minutes with me and taking valuable time out of your day. I hope in return that I am delivering value back to you, because the day I stop delivering value is the day I stop recording these videos. So thanks again. I hope you have a great week, and I'll see you next time.